No, I'm saying like I had a week of like a chest pain here, and I figured kind of wait this out, see if it's a heart attack. I think it's just a muscle, but you never know. But I survived, so I figured it wasn't a heart attack. But then it migrated to my back shoulder, and it kind of put me out for a few days. But
You know what?
I'm hanging in there.
What's funny about that is that I had a similar thing to that, and of course, you can't help but have your mind wander. You start to have like some tightness in the chest, or your arm goes numb, and you're like, oh, this is it. This is the end. It's a heart attack city. One day, when I was with the official fiance of It's Too Late, Annika, and I was coming downstairs, and right as I hit the bottom of the stairs, I felt that sensation. Like it was this real tightness right here, and like my arm kind of like like your arm falls asleep, sort of a thing.
Just like the commercial,
Yeah, just very
the heart
suddenly.
attack commercial.
And I just looked over at her, and she was actually looking at me, kind of surprised, like, is something wrong? And I looked over at her, and I said, I described my symptoms, and she just sat there like. And so then of course me being, of course it thankfully it wasn't a massive heart attack.
Yeah.
But I said to her, I was like, so because this is what you do now, you're going to have an argument. Is so it wasn't a heart attack, but if it was a heart attack, is that what you were going to do? You were just going to sit there and watch me? Yes.
See how that plays out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like, well, don't have insurance, and like ambulance rides are really expensive.
Oh,
So
I heard. Yeah.
yeah. So just goodbye. That's the it's the thing is that you'll spend the money on the damn diabetic cat, but me, I have to just wait and see if my heart attack goes away. That's what happens. We're gonna have another quick story time with Uncle Alan.
Oh, yay.
Yeah. Well, the last time we had story time with Uncle Alan, I talked about when the KKK came to my print shop wanting business cards, and that was just such a smash hit. Just
Everybody loved that.
more views and downloads than anything we'd ever done. Actually, that's not true. Second place. The most views and downloads we ever had was the girl who was coming off her dentist appointment anesthesia, mad because she couldn't suck dick. That got our most views and downloads ever. Our second most views and downloads ever was, oh, the KKK has business cards. Look at that. That's neat. So anyway, we're gonna do story time with Uncle Alan. Guess who I had lunch with this past weekend?
I couldn't even.
Well, I'm glad you're playing along because I know you know the answer. Now, I had lunch with Tom Woods this past weekend. He and his fiancee Jenna were up in Nashville for a concert, and we got together and had lunch on Saturday before their flight back to Florida.
That's
And
awesome.
we talked about all sorts of stuff. Of course, we talked about the white race stepping up to retake America, and things of that nature.
Yeah.
That's not true, by the way. That's a joke. Calm down, everyone. But one of the things we actually talked about is Tom, on a number of occasions now, has talked about his father. And his father, in the stories that he's told, so I know he wouldn't mind. His father was of modest means, and he didn't even graduate high school. He got his GED many years later, and he worked a very tough physical job. Later in life, he was a forklift operator in a hot, sweaty warehouse, and worked a lot of overtime to provide for his family. And Tom has talked a lot about, being appreciative of that, and being able to recognize that that my life is not like my dad's life at all. And if my father were a young man in the modern economy today, like no one would hire him. Like he couldn't get a job anywhere. Nobody would want to hire this guy.
Mhm.
But he worked hard at the time, and he made my life better because of it. And I actually talked to Tom a lot about how that's something that he and I share a lot in common with. So my dad, who's still with us, Tom's father had passed away. My father's still with us. He worked construction his whole life. I mean, preparing subdivisions for development, installing utilities, laying sewer pipe, laying sewer lines. That's what my dad did for most of his life. He was a guy that he got out of school, started college but dropped out because there was this war going on over there in East Asia, and he
Mm.
knew he was going to get drafted, so he just enlisted as opposed to wait to get his number called. And that actually really worked out for him because a lot of his buddies that he went to school with that tried to avoid the draft, and of course we're anti-draft on this program, but buddies of his that tried to avoid the draft and ultimately got drafted then went to Vietnam and didn't come back. My dad, seeing that this is very likely going to happen to me, he just enlisted ahead of time, and he wound up getting sent to Germany to work on radars. And that's where he spent the war, was Germany. The war in Vietnam, not the war. Thank God, not the war in World War II. That actually would have been a worse idea. It would have been better to be in Vietnam in the 40s than it would have been to be in Germany. But he went to Germany during Vietnam and worked on satellites, and then that was it. That was his whole enlistment. And when he came back home, he got into construction, and he worked construction his whole life. But what's funny is that, being in construction, here's like a dirty little secret about the construction business is when some highfalutin engineer or architect draws up plans, they can be riddled with mistakes. Mm-hmm. But they put their seal on it, and then they go take it to the state or the city. And then the city looks over the plans, and if they don't catch those mistakes, you know what they do? Or they don't care to catch them? They put their seal on it. It's approved. All right, go build. But now, the dumb old redneck construction workers who are just going by your plans that you drew up with all of your degrees and expertise and that you got approved by the city and all their codes and inspections, it's actually on the contractors that if a mistake gets made, it's their responsibility to fix it when they're just going by the plans you got approved. So what it ultimately boils down to is that the eggheads, the ones making six figures, who are the ones who are allegedly the learned folks who are putting these plans together, they rarely ever take any responsibility for poor performance, frankly. Whereas the old rednecks down in the ditch, they're the ones getting blamed if something goes wrong. And so my dad, not being an engineer, having no license or degree, was quite often the one who was actually fixing the plans and resubmitting them to get the changes approved, trying to save his employer money. The guy who couldn't pass muster, who would never get hired in any firm, and that the state would never allow to work as a licensed engineer. He's the one fixing the licensed engineer's mistakes. And so that's who my dad is. And Tom and I share that in common. And so the reason why I tell that story is that I know that there's a lot of people on social media nowadays, and even in our community, that like to argue about everything. I think this week all the arguments were about hobos and playgrounds and public libraries. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, they're still starving people in Yemen. Foreign policy is still a disaster and only going to get worse again long before it ever gets better. Ghislaine Maxwell trials going on right now, and you guys are fighting with people you agree with on 90% of things about what to do with the hobos at the playground. I'm like, good God, you fucking clowns. Anyway, I will always have a soft spot for just the regular salt of the earth types who don't bother themselves with any of that stuff you guys are arguing about. They're just trying to live their lives and do the best for them and theirs. And the people on social media arguing about going out of their way to find things to argue about and then having the edgiest hot takes first. Let me put out my video first and what I think about everything. We could do we could do with a lot less of that and a lot more people just trying to take care of them families.
Definitely.
This got really wholesome all of a sudden. I don't know what just happened. Yeah. This is supposed to be funny.